The heater died 10 minutes ago. My fingers are blue, my breath is a ghost, and outside this broken down car, there is nothing but white. A mountain pass in the middle of nowhere. No signal. No help coming. Just snow that wants to bury me alive, and me in a beige coat that was never built for this kind of cold. Then the black SUV slows down. The window rolls down, and I see him, dark eyes, sharp jaw, an expensive suit completely out of place in this frozen hell. He doesn't ask if I'm okay. He doesn't smile. He just looks at me the way a man looks at a problem he didn't plan for. His name is Cassian Moretti, head of one of the most feared Korean crime syndicates operating across 3 continents. A man who has spent 12 years building an empire on one unbreakable rule: never let anything in that you can't control. He was crossing this mountain pass in secret, avoiding police checkpoints, running a war in silence. The last thing he needed was a shivering stranger with nowhere to go. And I, Marigold Blythe, Goldie to the people who actually know me, I had spent my whole life being polished, prepared, and perfectly placed in polite society. Nothing in my world had ever prepared me for him. But the storm didn't care about either of our plans. What happened inside that safe house, the secrets, the danger, the moment everything between us shifted, would change us both in ways neither of us saw coming. If you love slow burn tension, a powerful man undone by the one variable he couldn't calculate, and a woman who finds her fire in the coldest place on earth, this story is for you. Welcome to Mafia Moonlight Tales. I'm so glad you're here. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment telling me your first impression of Cassian, and share this story with someone who needs a little danger in their reading life tonight. Because our story? It's only just beginning. Get in, or die. I don't have time to convince you. The SUV door swings open. And Goldie stares into the eyes of a man who looks far more dangerous than the frostbite. The SUV moved through the storm like it owned it. Cassian didn't speak. He didn't offer his name, didn't ask for mine, didn't turn the radio on to fill the silence. He simply drove, one hand on the wheel, eyes fixed on a road that had almost completely disappeared beneath the snow, as if ferrying half-frozen strangers through a whiteout was just another Tuesday. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, arms still wrapped around myself, teeth still fighting not to chatter. The heat from the vents was slowly pulling me back from the edge, but I was afraid to relax. Afraid that the moment I stopped bracing, I would fall apart completely. So I watched him instead. He was younger than I'd first thought, mid-30s, maybe, but there was nothing young about the way he held himself. His jaw was set like carved stone. The suit he wore was dark, immaculate, and completely insane for a mountain pass in a blizzard. A thin scar ran just below his left cheekbone, pale against his skin. He hadn't gotten that scar sitting behind a desk. Where are we going? I finally asked. Somewhere warm. He didn't look at me. That was all I got. 20 minutes later, the SUV turned off the road onto a path I would never have found on my own, winding up through dense pine trees until a structure appeared through the snow, low, angular, built into the mountainside like it was trying not to be seen. No warm porch light. No welcome mat. Just reinforced steel doors and windows that were just a little too narrow, set just a little too deep into the walls. The kind of windows designed to keep bullets out, not let sunlight in. He pulled into a concealed garage and the doors sealed behind us with a sound like a vault closing. I told myself I was being dramatic. I almost believed it. Inside was warm, at least. I'll give it that. But the moment I stepped through the interior door and looked around, something cold settled in my chest that had nothing to do with the storm. The space was large, open plan, high ceilings, expensive in the way that things are expensive when money is not the point. A long steel kitchen counter. A dark leather sofa facing a fireplace that Cassian moved to ignite without a word. Exposed concrete walls. Not a single photograph. Not a book left open on a table, not a coffee mug with a ring stain, not a jacket thrown over a chair. None of the small, careless evidence of a life being lived. The kind of details you don't notice when they're there, but hit you like a wall when they're not. What there was a rack of equipment along the far wall that I didn't recognize at first, until I did. Communication gear. Frequencies. A panel of monitors displaying camera feeds from 8 different angles outside the cabin, the treeline, the access road, the garage. A locked cabinet whose contents I couldn't see, but whose outline told me enough. And on the kitchen counter, half concealed beneath a folded jacket, the unmistakable shape of a handgun. I looked at it for exactly 1 second before I looked away, the way you look away from something you're not supposed to have seen. Sit by the fire. His voice came from behind me, low and even, the tone of a man who gave instructions and didn't repeat them. I sat. He moved through the space with the quiet efficiency of someone who had memorized every inch of it in the dark. He didn't look at the monitors, he checked them. There was a difference. One was habit. The other was survival. I pulled my knees to my chest and stared into the growing fire and thought about the word safehouse, and how it contained, right there in the middle of it, the word safe. I was beginning to wonder which one of us it was safe for. He set the glass down in front of me without asking. It was a heavy crystal tumbler, the kind that costs more than it should, and the brandy inside caught the firelight like liquid amber. I stared at it. Then I looked up at him. I don't really drink, I said. You're not drinking for pleasure. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat, leaning back with the unhurried ease of a man who had never once been told no and found the experience more curious than threatening. Your core temperature is too low. Drink. I wanted to argue. I also couldn't feel 3 of my fingers. I drank. It burned a path straight down the center of me, and for one involuntary moment I closed my eyes and just felt it. The warmth. The proof that I was still here, still alive, still something more than a frozen outline on the side of a mountain road. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Not warm. Not cold. Something more unsettling than either, calculating. Better, he asked. Marginally, I said, and something shifted almost imperceptibly at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. I wrapped both hands around the tumbler. Thank you. For stopping. It was logical, he said. A body in the road would have been an inconvenience. I blinked. A body. You had approximately 20 more minutes before hypothermia became irreversible. He said it the way someone might comment on the weather. Factual. Unbothered. I was passing anyway. I studied him across the firelight. The suit. The scar. The way he sat, perfectly still, like stillness was a discipline he had practiced until it became a weapon. What kind of person talks about a human life in terms of logical inconvenience? An honest one. Or a dangerous one. He tilted his head slightly, conceding nothing. Where were you going? On a mountain pass. In that coat. The way he said that coat, not cruel, just precise, made me want to defend myself, which irritated me, which made me sit straighter. I was driving to my sister's. In Carrington Valley. I had a conference in the city and I thought I could beat the storm and I stopped. I made a bad decision. Several, he agreed. You don't have to say it like that. Would you prefer I lie to you? I opened my mouth. Closed it. Took another sip of brandy. What about you? What does a man in a $3,000 suit have to do on a mountain pass in the middle of a blizzard? The temperature in the room didn't change, but something in him did. A door closing behind his eyes, quiet and absolute. Business. What kind of business? The kind that doesn't require your understanding. There it was. The wall. Smooth and total and built so well you almost didn't notice it until you were already pressing against it. I recognized the architecture. I had grown up around men like that. Men who moved money and power through rooms and expected the women in those rooms to be decorative and uncurious. My father. My ex-fiancé. Men for whom control was a love language. I had spent years learning to be small enough to fit inside their version of the world. I looked at Cassian Moretti, really looked, and understood that he was something else entirely. Those men had wielded power like an accessory. This man was the power. It wasn't something he put on in the morning. It was structural. Bone deep. And he was watching me figure that out in real time, completely unbothered by what I might conclude. You should sleep, he said finally, standing. You're safe tonight. He said it like a fact. I held the warm crystal glass against my chest and watched the fire and thought, safe was a word that meant very different things to the two of us. I found it by accident. He had given me the bedroom at the end of the hall, sparse, military clean, a bed that had clearly never been slept in for comfort, and I should have stayed there. I should have done exactly what he said, closed the door, and let exhaustion take me under. But the brandy had settled into a restless warmth rather than sleep, and somewhere around midnight I slipped out for water. The main room was dim, the fire burned low. And Cassian was standing at the kitchen counter with his back to me, his jacket off, the white of his dress shirt pulled away from his left side, and dark with blood. I made a sound before I could stop myself. He turned fast. Faster than a man with a wound that size should have been able to. The controlled blankness on his face didn't crack, it simply recalibrated, the way a machine adjusts after an unexpected input. Go back to bed, he said. That is a serious wound. I'm aware. How long have you been? I crossed the room before I fully decided to, something overriding my better judgment. Up close it was worse. The cut ran along his lower left side, deep enough to need more than time. His jaw was set with the particular rigidity of someone who had been managing pain quietly for hours. Cassian. You need this dressed properly or it will get infected. Something moved across his face at the sound of his name in my mouth. Like I had touched something without permission. I've had worse. That isn't the reassurance you think it is. I was already moving to the cabinet beneath the sink, a guess, but a correct one. First aid kit, military grade, fully stocked. The kind of preparedness that told its own story. I set it on the counter and turned to face him. Sit down. A long pause. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm pressed against the windows. He sat. I don't know what I expected, resistance, perhaps, or that cold wall of refusal. What I didn't expect was the quiet compliance, or how much more unnerving it was than defiance. As if he had done a rapid, private calculation and determined that this was the most efficient path forward. Not surrender. Strategy. I pulled on the gloves from the kit and began to work. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, kept his eyes fixed on the middle distance like a man meditating through the inconvenience of being human. I had to lean close, closer than was comfortable, to properly clean the wound, my fingers careful and deliberate against the heat of his skin. He was very warm. I noticed that the way you notice something you'd rather not. This is going to need butterfly closures, I said quietly. Then use them. You could have told me you were hurt. You were cold. A pause. One problem at a time. I pressed the first closure into place. His muscles contracted involuntarily beneath my fingers, the only concession his body made to the pain, and something about that small, unwilling honesty felt more intimate than anything else that had passed between us. Who did this to you? I asked, keeping my eyes on my work. A business associate, he said. With poor negotiating skills. I almost laughed. The absurdity of it, of all of this, pressed briefly against the inside of my chest. Is that what you call it? What would you call it? I applied the last closure and held my hand flat against the dressing for a moment, the way you're supposed to help it set. His breathing was even. Controlled. But beneath my palm, his heart was beating harder than his composure suggested. I stepped back and stripped the gloves. Thank you, he said. Just that. No elaboration. I looked at him, shirt sleeves undone, firelight on the scar at his cheek, and understood, with quiet alarm, that he was the most alone person I had ever been in a room with. Get some sleep, I said softly. One problem at a time. I slept deeper than I had any right to. When I woke, the fire had been restoked. Someone had done it quietly while I slept, which meant Cassian had been awake, and moving, and close enough to the bedroom door to hear me breathing. I told myself that wasn't unsettling. I almost convinced myself. The safe house was still in the gray, pre-dawn way that made everything feel suspended. The storm outside softened to a low murmur, the monitors on the far wall casting their cold blue light across the room. Cassian stood with his back to me near the window, satellite phone pressed to his ear, a fresh shirt on, the wound beneath it invisible again. Contained. Like everything else about him. I should have made noise. Cleared my throat, shuffled my feet, given him the courtesy of knowing I was there. I didn't. The shipment doesn't move until I say it moves. His voice was different on the phone. Not louder, if anything, quieter. But the texture of it had changed completely. All the careful, measured neutrality of our conversations was gone, replaced with something flat and absolute, like a blade laid on a table. I don't care what Yun said. Yun answers to me. A pause. He listened. Whatever the response was, it tightened something along his jaw. Then he made a mistake. Another pause. Shorter this time. Correct it. 2 words. Spoken the way you'd say close the window or turn off the light. The complete absence of heat in them was what stopped my breath. Not anger, not malice, but something colder and more final than either. An instruction delivered by a man for whom consequences were not personal. They were simply logistics. The call ended. He lowered the phone. How much did you hear? He didn't turn around. There was no point in pretending. Enough. He turned then, and looked at me across the room with those dark, unreadable eyes, and I realized he was doing it again, the rapid calculation, assessing exactly what I knew, what I understood, what I was likely to do with it. I was a variable being measured. Sit down, Goldie. It was the first time he had used my name. It landed differently than I expected, not soft, but deliberate. Like he had been holding it at a careful distance and had now decided to close the gap. I sat. He remained standing. You're going to have questions, he said. I'm going to have one question, I said carefully. And I'd like an honest answer. He waited. The man on the phone. The one you told to correct something. I kept my voice steady through the architecture of what I was actually asking. Did you mean what I think you meant? The fire popped quietly in the silence that followed. Cassian looked at me for a long moment, and I understood that he was giving me something rare, not the wall, not the deflection, but the actual, unvarnished shape of the truth. Yes, he said. One word. The same way he'd said correct it. Quiet and complete, and carrying the full weight of everything it implied. The room didn't change. The fire kept burning. But the version of Cassian Moretti I had been carefully constructing since last night, the cold stranger, the efficient rescuer, the wounded man who said one problem at a time, quietly collapsed, and something far more dangerous stood in his place. He was not a businessman avoiding a checkpoint. He was not a man with complicated associates and a morally gray occupation. He was the kind of man that other dangerous men answered to, feared, and occasionally tried to kill. He ran a syndicate. And I had dressed his wounds by firelight and handed him back his composure with both hands. Are you going to run? He asked. Not a taunt. A genuine question. I looked at the sealed doors, the monitors, the storm still pressing white against every window. Where exactly, I said quietly, would I go? The power went out at 10:30. Not gradually, not a flicker and a warning and a slow dimming. One moment the monitors were glowing, the overhead lights were burning their cold, functional white, and the hum of the heating system was a steady undercurrent beneath the silence. The next, all of it was simply gone. The safehouse dropped into darkness so complete it had weight, broken only by the amber pulse of the fireplace. Then Cassian said something in Korean that I was fairly certain wasn't polite. I heard him moving in the dark, unhurried, precise, the sound of someone navigating from memory. A flashlight beam cut across the room as he opened the utility panel near the door. I watched him work, his face lit from below, jaw set with a specific expression I was beginning to recognize as his version of frustration. Controlled. Internal. A storm behind glass. The backup generator took ice damage, he said without turning. It won't restart until the temperature outside rises. How long will that be? Morning, at the earliest. I looked at the fireplace, the single, genuine source of heat in the entire structure, and then at the hallway leading to the bedroom I'd been given, which was now a cold, dark corridor leading to a cold, dark room with a cold, dark bed. The temperature will drop significantly in the rest of the structure, Cassian said, still looking at the panel. He closed it. Turned. His eyes moved from the fireplace to me, and I could see him doing it again, the calculation, the logic, the assembling of the only rational conclusion. Something in his expression suggested he found the conclusion deeply inconvenient. There's a cot in the equipment room. I'll take it. That room is further from the fire than the bedroom, I said. I'm aware. Cassian. I said his name the way he'd said mine, deliberately, closing a careful distance. You have a wound in your side, the temperature is dropping, and you are apparently the only thing standing between us and whatever is out in that storm. You sleeping on a cot in a freezing room helps neither of us. A long silence. The fire breathed between us. The couch, he said finally. The couch is 6 feet from the fire. The small bed in the equipment alcove is 3. I had done a quiet survey of the safehouse during the afternoon, the way you do when you're not sure what you're preparing for but you're certain you should prepare. It's the warmest spot in the building. We're adults. It's a practical decision. He looked at me for a long moment, and I held his gaze steadily, because I had learned in the last 24 hours that dropping it felt like losing something I couldn't afford to lose. Fine, he said. The alcove off the main room was small, a narrow bed wedged between a shelving unit and the stone wall nearest the fireplace, clearly designed for function rather than comfort. We lay down with the careful, deliberate distance of 2 people drawing invisible boundary lines in the dark, a full foot of cold space between us that neither acknowledged and both felt. He was still for a long time. Then, quietly, almost inaudibly, he exhaled. A long, slow release that he had probably been withholding for hours. Maybe longer. The sound of someone setting something heavy down when they thought no one was listening. I didn't say anything. After a while, his breathing deepened and steadied, and I realized with a curious ache that he had fallen asleep. That against every instinct and calculation and carefully maintained wall, something in him had decided, in this small warm space next to a woman who had asked nothing of him but honesty, that it was safe enough to let go. I stared at the firelight moving across the ceiling. The immovable object, I thought, was not as immovable as it believed. I don't know what time it was when he spoke. The fire had burned lower, the alcove wrapped in that particular quality of darkness that exists only in the deep middle of the night, when the world outside has gone completely still and the silence has a texture you can almost touch. I had been hovering in that shallow, restless space between sleep and waking, aware of the warmth beside me, aware of the careful distance still maintained even in unconsciousness, when his voice came, low and unprompted, out of the dark. His name is Juno. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Something told me that the wrong response, any response that reminded him he was talking out loud, to another person, in the dark, would close this before it opened. My younger brother, he continued. His voice was different again. Not the blade from the phone call, not the measured neutrality of our conversations. Something older. Something that had been pressed flat for a very long time and had found, in the particular honesty of 3 a.m., a hairline crack to move through. He was 16 when our father died and I took over the syndicate. I spent 12 years protecting him from it. Keeping him clean. Keeping him out. A pause. He spent 12 years learning everything I knew, and waiting. The fire shifted. A log settled. He told the CO faction where I'd be last Tuesday, Cassian said. The ambush on the eastern route. That's where the wound came from. He said it without drama, without the particular self-pity that a lesser man might have reached for. Just the clean, terrible shape of it, laid out in the dark. My own brother sold the coordinates. I exhaled slowly. Cassian. I don't need sympathy, he said, quiet and immediate. Not unkind. Just certain. I need you to understand why I'm on this road instead of my own. Why there are no checkpoints I can trust. Why everyone who knows my face is either hunting me or waiting to see which way it falls before they choose a side. You're alone, I said softly. A long silence. I'm contained, he said finally. The substitution was so deliberate, so carefully chosen, that it told me everything he hadn't said. We lay in the dark for a while, and I turned what he'd given me over quietly, the way you handle something fragile, aware of the weight of it, aware that he had never said it out loud before, perhaps to anyone. I was supposed to get married in April, I said eventually. I felt rather than saw him turn his head slightly toward me. His name was Edmund. He was perfectly suitable in every way that looks good on paper. Family approved. Financially stable. Socially impeccable. I kept my eyes on the ceiling. And being with him felt like slowly disappearing. Like I was being filed away somewhere clean and correct and utterly airless. I paused. I ended it 3 weeks ago. My mother hasn't spoken to me since. I was driving to my sister's because she's the only person in my life who said, "Good." The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Fuller, somehow. So you were running, he said. I was running, I agreed. Just like you. Another quiet stretch. Outside, the storm had gentled to almost nothing, just the occasional whisper of wind against the glass, the world outside rearranging itself in the dark. Your sister, he said. She sounds like someone worth reaching. Something small and genuine moved through my chest. She is. He didn't say anything after that. Neither did I. But the careful, invisible boundary line between us had shifted, not disappeared, not collapsed, but moved. Quietly. Like a border being redrawn in the night by two people who hadn't planned to negotiate at all. I closed my eyes. For the first time since the heater died, I was completely warm. I felt him leave before I heard it. One moment the warmth beside me was present and steady, the next it was simply gone, a clean, immediate absence, like a candle being cupped out. I opened my eyes to the dim alcove and found the space beside me empty, the blanket pulled back with surgical precision, no crease or disruption that suggested haste. Just, gone. As if he had never been there at all. Then I heard it. Or rather, I heard what had woken him. Nothing. Not silence, something beneath silence. A low, electronic pulse from the main room, so subtle it registered more as a change in air pressure than an actual sound. I rose quietly and moved to the doorway. Cassian was at the monitor panel, the screens reactivated on a separate battery circuit I hadn't known existed. He stood completely still, both hands braced against the console, eyes moving across the feeds with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not fear. Nothing so human and disordered as fear. Something colder, the look of a man running calculations at speed, every variable being weighted and assigned. I crossed the room to stand beside him and looked at the screens. On the feed covering the access road, the one that wound down through the pine trees to the main pass, two pale circles moved through the dark. Headlights. Moving slowly, without the hesitation of someone who didn't know where they were going. Purposeful. Deliberate. How did they find us? I asked, keeping my voice low out of instinct. The SUV has a tracker I didn't sweep. His voice was completely flat. My mistake. The way he said it, 2 words, no self-recrimination, just a fact filed and catalogued, told me that he was already past it. Already 3 moves ahead. He straightened and turned to the weapons cabinet, using a keypad I hadn't seen him use before. The door opened. Inside was everything I had suspected and several things I hadn't. He moved efficiently, his hands certain and unhurried, checking and securing with the practiced economy of someone for whom this was not a crisis but a transition, the shift from one operational mode to another. He held something out to me without turning. A handgun, safety on, grip facing outward. I stared at it. I started. I know you don't. He turned and looked at me directly, and in the blue light of the monitors his eyes were very clear. The safety is here. He touched it briefly. Point and don't hesitate. You won't need it if everything goes correctly. But nothing tonight has gone correctly, so. I took it. It was heavier than I expected. Everything real always is. On the monitors, the headlights had stopped. 2 vehicles, I could see now, both dark, both angled toward the tree line in a way that said these were people who understood approach geometry. 4 doors opened. 4 figures moved into the snow, low and coordinated, spreading apart in practiced formation. 4 of them. 1 of him. 1 of me, with a gun I didn't know how to use and hands that were trembling in a way I was furious about. Cassian. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I see them. What do we do? He was quiet for 3 full seconds, not frozen, not hesitating, but thinking with the total focus of someone for whom thinking was its own form of action. Then he reached up and killed the last of the interior lights. The safehouse dropped into complete darkness, the only illumination the cold blue ghost of the monitors and the dying ember glow from the fireplace. We let them come to us, he said quietly. And in the dark, in the snow, in the silence of a safehouse that suddenly felt very small, the headlights went out. They were close now. And they did not want to be seen. There's a panic room behind the bookcase. He said it while checking the perimeter feeds one last time, his voice carrying the same tone he used for everything, level, efficient, as if he were giving directions to a location rather than instructions for my survival. He moved to the far wall and pressed a specific point in the shelving. A section swung inward, revealing a narrow steel door beyond. Reinforced walls, independent air supply, internal lock only. He pushed it open. Inside was dark and small and smelled of metal and sealed air. You'll be safe until it's over. I looked at the room. Then I looked at him. No, I said. He turned, and the expression on his face was the one I imagined he used on subordinates who had misheard a direct order. Patient. Briefly. Goldie. I heard you. I kept my voice low, aware of the silence outside that was no longer comforting. And the answer is no. This is not a negotiation. You're right. It isn't. I moved away from the panic room, back toward the monitors, keeping the handgun at my side the way he'd shown me. There are 4 of them and 1 of you. You have a wound in your left side that I dressed 8 hours ago, which means your range of movement is compromised on that side whether you'll admit it or not. I turned to face him. You need someone who can move through this space without being accounted for. Something shifted in his expression. Almost imperceptible, a slight recalibration, the kind that meant a variable had behaved unexpectedly. You've never held a gun before tonight, he said. No. But I've spent the last 24 hours watching how you move through this space. I know every room. I know which angles the monitors cover and which they don't. I held his gaze. I'm not asking to fight your war, Cassian. I'm telling you that locking me in a box and fighting 4 armed men alone with a compromised left side is the less logical option, and you know it. The word logical landed deliberately. I watched him register it. Outside, somewhere in the tree line, a branch snapped. Close. The sound of someone, moving through the snow with controlled, careful weight. His jaw tightened. He crossed to me in 3 steps and stopped close enough that I had to resist the instinct to step back. His eyes moved across my face with that familiar, rapid precision, reading me the way he read the monitors, assessing what was reliable, what would hold. You do exactly what I tell you, he said quietly. The moment I say move, you move. The moment I say down, you're on the floor before the word is finished. You don't improvise, you don't hesitate, and you don't try to be brave. I'm not trying to be brave, I said. I'm trying to be useful. Another long beat. Then he reached into the cabinet and pressed something small and cold into my free hand, an earpiece, compact and dark. He fitted its pair into his own ear. Stay in the east corridor, he said, low. The junction gives you a sight line to the main entrance and the south window. If anyone comes through either that isn't me, you use the gun and you don't think about it first. I nodded. He looked at me for one more moment, and in that look was something I hadn't seen from him before. Not calculation. Not the rapid, cold assessment of a variable. Something quieter and less controlled than any of that. Something that looked, briefly and unmistakably, like he was afraid of losing something he hadn't expected to have. Then it was gone. The wall back in place, smooth and total. Stay low, he said. He moved into the dark. And I, Marigold Blythe, in a beige coat and borrowed socks, with a gun I'd held for less than an hour, followed. They came through the south window first. I heard the glass before I saw anything, a precise, professional break, the kind that uses a tool rather than force, designed to be quiet and wasn't quiet enough. Then a shape in the darkness of the main room, moving low and fast, sweeping the space with a tactical light that cut the dark in sharp, clinical slices. I pressed myself flat against the east corridor wall and didn't breathe. Through the earpiece, Cassian's voice came, barely a whisper, just shape and consonants. South. 1. Wait. I waited. The figure moved deeper into the room, past the cold fireplace, past the monitors still casting their ghost blue light. He was professional, disciplined, checking corners with the systematic patience of someone trained to do this. But he was checking for one person. He wasn't looking for a woman in a borrowed sweater pressed into a shadow he'd already dismissed. That was the thing about being underestimated. It had always felt like a wound. Standing there in the dark, I felt it become something else entirely. A second breach, the main door this time, the lock defeated with practiced efficiency. 2 more figures entered, fanning out. Somewhere at the back of the structure I heard the 4th working the utility entrance. 4 points. 4 angles. All converging. Then a burst of sound from the back, a crash, a struggle, Cassian engaging before they expected him and with more force than the wound in his side should have permitted. 2 of them redirected toward it, moving fast. That left 1. The first man, the south window entry, was between me and the main room, his back partially turned, attention pulled toward the sounds of the fight. He hadn't cleared the corridor. He didn't know I was there. And Cassian was outnumbered. I didn't think. I did exactly what he told me not to do, I improvised. I grabbed the ceramic lamp from the hall table beside me and hurled it hard and high toward the far end of the corridor, away from both of us. It shattered against the wall with a sound completely out of proportion to its size. The man spun toward it, weapon raised, body turning fully away from the main room entrance. 1 second. Maybe 2. It was enough. Cassian came through the main room doorway like something final, fast and low and absolute, and the man who had been about to circle back to him was already half a second behind where the world had moved to. It was over before I fully processed what I was watching. Clean. Efficient. The way Cassian did everything. The safehouse went quiet. Not gradually, the same way the power had gone out. One moment there was chaos, and the next there was nothing but the sound of breathing and the distant, settling creak of the structure around us. Cassian's voice came through the earpiece. Clear. I leaned against the corridor wall and let my legs make their own decision about whether to keep holding me up. They negotiated briefly and settled on a slow slide until I was sitting on the cold floor, the unfired gun in my lap, my hands shaking in the way they had refused to shake while it mattered. He found me there. Said nothing, just looked at me with that expression I was beginning to know, the one that wasn't quite readable but was no longer entirely closed. He extended a hand. I took it. He pulled me to my feet with his right arm, keeping the left close. The wound had cost him something tonight, I could see it in the set of his jaw. The lamp, he said. It worked, I said. Something crossed his face. Not the ghost of a smile this time. The real thing, brief, almost startled, as if it had escaped before he could contain it. Then the darkness outside the window changed. We both turned. Along the eastern ridge, where the storm had pressed for 2 days without relenting, the sky was shifting, the black thinning to deep violet, to gray, to the pale, fragile gold of something beginning. The snow had stopped. The trees along the tree line stood still for the first time, the wind gone, the world outside rinsed clean and silent. Crimson, at the very edge of the horizon. The first real color in 2 days. I stood beside him in the wreckage of the night and watched the dawn come, and felt, beneath the shaking hands and the adrenaline still burning through me, something that had no clean name. Not safety. Not relief. Something more like arrival. We didn't speak for a long time after the dawn came. There was something about that light, fragile and rose gold and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it, that made words feel presumptuous. So we stood at the window, Cassian and I, and let the silence do what silence does when two people have stopped being strangers and haven't yet decided what they are instead. He spoke first. You should have gone into the panic room. I know, I said. You could have been killed. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. You weren't afraid? I turned that over honestly. I was terrified, I said. My hands didn't stop shaking the entire time. But I've learned something recently about fear. It was never the opposite of courage. It's just the price of admission. He looked at me with that expression I had come to recognize as his version of being moved, still, and careful, and privately rearranged. I had spent 31 years being afraid of all the wrong things. Afraid of disappointing my family, of choosing wrongly, of being too much or not enough for the rooms I was placed in. I had dressed that fear up in compliance and called it grace, in silence and called it poise. I had made myself smaller and told myself that was the same as being safe. And then a snowstorm stripped every bit of it away. No status. No social grace. No performance of being the right kind of woman in the right kind of coat. Just me, and the cold, and a man who ran a criminal empire and had still, quietly, without fanfare, restoked the fire while I slept. Here is what I understand now, standing in the wreckage of a night that should have broken me. Comfort is not the same as strength. The version of myself I'd been so carefully maintaining, polished, contained, palatable, had never actually been tested. It had only ever been displayed. And you cannot know what you are made of in a life that never asks anything difficult of you. The storm asked. And I answered. Not perfectly. Not without fear. But I answered. Cassian moved away from the window and I watched him, the careful way he held his left side, the way his eyes still swept the room out of pure instinct, the particular solitude of a man who had built his entire architecture around never needing anyone. He had spent 12 years controlling every variable, sealing every entrance, trusting no one and calling it wisdom. And then I had sat down at his fireplace and asked him inconvenient questions and dressed his wound and handed him a brandy glass and refused, repeatedly, to behave like a variable. What breaks us open is never what we planned for. It's always the thing we didn't account for, the storm, the stranger, the moment when the careful structure we've built to keep the world out suddenly has to let something in or collapse entirely. Cassian had let me in not because he chose to, but because the alternative was a wound he couldn't dress alone and a night he couldn't survive without someone who knew which corridors the monitors didn't cover. Vulnerability had not weakened either of us. It had simply told us the truth about who we were, and given us the chance to be more than we'd settled for. He stopped in the center of the room and turned to look at me. Something in his expression was different in the morning light. Still guarded, it would probably always be guarded. But the wall had a door in it now, and we both knew where it was. Carrington Valley, he said. Your sister. Yes, I said. I'll take you. A pause. The weight of what he wasn't saying moved through the space between us. Unless you'd like to stay. I looked at him, scarred and guarded and quietly, irreversibly altered, and felt the warm, terrifying pull of something I had no category for yet. The storm had taken everything I thought I needed. And left me, somehow, with more.